A nanny finds baby abandoned on the floor. Millionaire walks in and uncovers the truth about her. Claire Bennett tugged gently at the collar of her pale blue uniform, smoothing it out as she prepared to enter the main wing of the Whitmore estate. Morning had just broken over Napa Valley, casting golden rays through the sprawling grapevines outside and painting flecks of light on the stone-tiled floors. At 28, Claire was no longer a woman of daydreams. Her face carried the quiet composure of someone who had lived too much too soon. Her hazel eyes always seemed to hold something soft and a little tired. For nearly 3 years, Claire had worked as a housekeeper at the Whitmore estate. The job was routine, repetitive, but to her, it was precious. Every dollar she earned went toward her mother's medical bills. Evelyn Bennett, fragile and fading, battled a heart condition and depression from the confines of a modest trailer at the edge of town. Since her father's passing, Claire had become the backbone of their small family. She had let go of her childhood dream of becoming a preschool teacher and threw herself into any work she could find, so long as it paid. Landing a job at the Whitmore estate, home to one of Napa Valley's wealthiest families, felt like a lifeline. She promised herself she would never mess it up. The Whitmore mansion stood at the heart of an expansive vineyard, its historic architecture nestled among rows of thriving grapevines. Ethan Whitmore, the only heir, was a quiet, reserved man. Claire rarely saw him. On the rare occasions their paths crossed, she would simply nod respectfully and retreat. That was the unspoken rule here. Do your job well and stay invisible. But something about this morning felt different. Claire sensed it as she passed through the western corridor, a normally silent hallway, now filled with a faint, almost imperceptible sound. A muffled whimper. She froze. It was a sound she knew instantly, one that made her heart thud with urgency. A baby crying. She followed the sound with quickening steps, which led her toward the laundry room. As she gently pushed open the door, the scene before her made her gasp. A baby, no more than 8 months old, lay on the cold tile floor, his diaper soaked and his small legs tinted a purplish blue. He sobbed in quiet desperation, as if he'd cried so long he had run out of strength. "Oh my God," Claire whispered, falling to her knees beside him, carefully lifting his trembling body into her arms. His skin was icy. No one else was around. Not a sound. She looked back, called out softly, "Hello? Is anyone here?" But the only reply was the dull hum of the washing machine. She looked into the baby's tear-streaked face. He clung to her shirt, his head pressing into her chest as though it were the only safe place in the world. Claire held him close. What she didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that in that exact moment, through one simple instinctive act of compassion, her life was about to change forever. Claire held the baby tighter, feeling his faint breaths against her chest. His tiny body trembled, and his skin was cold and pale. She glanced around, looking for towels, clean diapers, anything to keep him warm. On a table near the dryer, she spotted a pack of diapers and some baby supplies. Her hands trembled slightly, but her movements were steady with purpose. She laid the baby on a folded blanket nearby, carefully removed his soaked diaper, and began cleaning his delicate skin with utmost care. "It's okay now, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice soft like a lullaby. The baby, Chris, stopped crying, as though her arms were the only safe place he knew. His dark eyes locked onto hers. Claire smiled gently, her heart tightening. How could someone leave such a fragile soul like this? She didn't know much about the child, only bits and pieces from whispered conversations that he was the son of Ethan Whitmore's sister, currently overseas for work. Chris had been left in the care of the family. But where was the nanny? Claire looked around once more. Still no one. just the quiet hum of laundry machines and the steady, shallow breathing of the baby in her arms. And then, the sound of footsteps. Firm, deliberate, approaching fast. Claire looked up. The door swung open. Ethan Whitmore. He stood tall in the doorway, dark brown hair, neatly styled, dressed in a crisp white shirt and tailored trousers. His steel-gray eyes scanned the room, settling on Claire, kneeling on the floor, baby in arms, surrounded by a mess of used diapers. Silence fell. "What's going on here?" His voice cut through the room like a blade. Claire swallowed hard. She was still kneeling, unable to rise. Everything looked wrong. She tried to speak. "Mr. Whitmore, I was just—" "Where is the nanny?" he interrupted. "She wasn't here when I arrived. Chris was on the floor? And you thought it was appropriate to touch my nephew without permission?" His tone turned sharp. Claire held Chris tighter, feeling the baby curl deeper into her chest, now quiet and still. He was freezing, exhausted from crying. "I just did what needed to be done." Her voice was soft but steady. The silence between them stretched. Ethan said nothing. His eyes moved from her face to the baby, who now slept soundly in Claire's arms as though he belonged there. "How long have you worked here?" he finally asked. "Almost 3 years," Claire answered. "Always as a housekeeper?" "Yes, sir." Ethan stepped closer, the subtle scent of aged grapes trailing with him. He extended his arms. "Give Chris to me." Claire hesitated, but obeyed. As she transferred the baby to his arms, their fingers brushed. A jolt of something, electric, unspoken, passed between them. Both noticed. Chris instantly stirred, squirming restlessly in Ethan's hold, then reached his small hands back toward Claire. "He wants you," Ethan said softly, almost in awe. "Babies feel love before they understand it," Claire replied, turning away to hide her flushed cheeks. Ethan continued watching as she began cleaning up the supplies. In the hush between them, something had shifted, something unspoken, fragile, but undeniably real. Claire quietly gathered the remaining supplies, carefully placing the soiled diapers and wipes into a plastic bag. Ethan stood nearby, still holding Chris in his arms, his eyes following her every movement. "Do you have children?" he asked suddenly, his voice low, but no longer sharp. Claire paused. She shook her head. "No, sir. I take care of my mother. She's not well." Ethan gave a small nod, as if mentally filing away the information. After a moment, he asked again, softer this time, almost curious. "What did you want to do before this job?" Claire looked down at her hands, rough from years of labor, yet still capable of a tenderness that had just calmed a crying baby. "I used to dream of becoming a preschool teacher," she said softly. Ethan tilted his head, visibly surprised. "Really?" "Yes, I've always loved children. When I was little, I used to play school with the neighborhood kids back in Alabama. I'd make a chalkboard, read books aloud, and they'd call me Miss Claire." She smiled gently, the memory softening her features. "So, what stopped you from pursuing that?" Claire looked up at him, for the first time, really meeting his gaze. "My father passed away when I was 16. My mom got sick not long after. We had no insurance, no savings. I dropped out of school to work. Any job I could find, just to survive. Dreams had to wait." Ethan remained silent. Chris was now fast asleep in his arms, his tiny face peaceful. But it was Ethan's silence that felt the heaviest. "I'm not telling you this to get pity," Claire added, her tone calm. "I've accepted the life I have. But sometimes I miss that feeling, standing in front of a little group, reading them a story. That feeling, it's unlike anything else." Ethan watched her for a long moment. For the first time, he didn't just see a housekeeper. He saw a woman who had sacrificed her youth, her dreams, just to survive. And that left him more speechless than anything else could have. Ever since that morning, Claire held Chris in the laundry room. The air in the mansion had shifted. No one said anything aloud, but the look she received from the other staff began to change, half curious, half critical. And Lena, Chris's official nanny, didn't bother hiding her irritation. She began scoffing whenever Claire passed by, making vague remarks to others like, "Some people think cuddling a baby is enough to earn a promotion." "Just because you hold a baby doesn't mean you're Mother of the Year," Lena muttered one day as Claire walked into the kitchen. Claire didn't react. She simply lowered her gaze and continued wiping the counters as though she hadn't heard a word. She had long learned not to waste energy on cheap malice. But what truly worried Claire was Chris. More and more, she noticed that Lena was constantly glued to her phone. There were times when Chris would cry for minutes in his crib while Lena sat nearby, headphones in, lost in social media. One morning, Claire passed by the nursery and heard frantic crying. She gently pushed the door open to find Chris red-faced, his little fists pounding the mattress. Lena was in the chair, earbuds in, eyes fixed on her phone screen. Claire stepped in quietly, scooped Chris into her arms, and began to soothe him. When Lena finally noticed, she yanked out her earbuds and glared. "What are you doing? That's my job," Lena snapped. "He's been crying for a while. I was just helping," Claire replied calmly. "Helping?" Lena scoffed. "I know exactly what you're trying to do." Claire didn't respond. She gently placed Chris back in the crib, patted his back softly, and walked away. Ethan had begun to notice. He observed that every time Claire entered the room, Chris would settle, calmer, quieter. Babies don't lie. They simply respond to what they feel. One afternoon, Ethan happened to see Lena sitting in the garden, laughing at something on her phone, while Chris played alone under a tree, his face streaked with dirt. Ethan froze. Something inside him stirred. He remembered that morning when Claire held Chris, the softness in her voice, the care in her hands, the love in her eyes. He said nothing. But from that moment on, something in Ethan's gaze told Claire clearly. He was starting to believe her. On Monday morning, a black car pulled up in front of the estate gates. Sophia Whitmore had returned after 2 weeks of business in New York. Every step she took radiated the confidence and poise of a successful attorney and respected single mother in high society. The moment she stepped inside, she didn't waste time. "Where's Chris?" she asked the house manager. "He's in the garden with Lena, ma'am," the manager replied. Sophia walked straight toward the glass doors that opened to the back garden. The sight before her made her brow furrow instantly. Chris was sitting alone beneath a tree, scooping dirt with his hands, his clothes smeared and messy. A few meters away, Lena, the paid nanny, sat with her legs crossed, giggling at something on her phone. Earbuds firmly in place, completely unaware of her surroundings. Sophia said nothing. She opened the door and walked directly outside. Lena looked up just in time to see Sophia standing right in front of her. "Ms. Sophia!" Lena scrambled to her feet, yanking out her earbuds. "Lena, my office, now," Sophia said, her tone calm but razor-sharp. 15 minutes later, Lena exited the estate, her eyes red, clutching her handbag tightly. As she passed Claire in the hallway, she paused just long enough to hiss, "You think you're something special?" Her voice was low, biting. "People like you never last in a place like this." Claire didn't reply. She only gripped the cleaning cloth in her hands a little tighter and turned away. That afternoon, Claire was called into the office. Sophia was already waiting, seated behind her gleaming mahogany desk. The late afternoon sun filtered through sheer curtains, casting a soft golden hue across the room. "Have a seat, Claire." Claire hesitated, her heart racing as she sat down. She didn't know what was coming. "I've been watching closely these past few days," Sophia began, "and today I saw enough." Claire swallowed hard, remaining silent. "I believe you are the right person to care for Chris," Sophia said plainly. "I'd like to offer you the role of official nanny." Claire was stunned. "Ma'am, I don't have any credentials. I'm just a cleaner." "You have what no diploma can teach," Sophia said firmly. "Attention, patience, and most importantly, genuine affection. The baby feels that." Claire looked down at her hands. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately. Another part held back, afraid of being misunderstood, afraid of how others might see her. "If I accept," she said quietly, "can I still help with cleaning when I have time? I don't want others to think I'm trying to climb over them." Sophia raised an eyebrow, then nodded. "If that's what makes you comfortable, but you don't have to prove anything. Not to me." Claire smiled, a quiet smile, but different this time. There was trust in it, and a fragile new hope. "Then I accept." Sophia rose, walked around the desk, and extended her hand. "Welcome to your new role." Claire shook her hand. These hands that had scrubbed floors and cleaned toilets were now entrusted with the care of a child. And to her, that felt more sacred than any job title ever could. Since Claire became the official nanny, her presence in the Whitmore estate subtly shifted. No longer the quiet shadow moving through hallways, she now appeared more often, not just because of duty, but because Ethan Whitmore had begun to seek her out. He spent more time at home, postponed a few business trips, and frequently paused to talk with Claire after her duties. What started as short exchanges about Chris's feeding and nap schedule gradually grew into longer, more personal, and warmly familiar conversations. "Have you always liked working with children?" Ethan asked one afternoon, while they sat in the back garden, Chris sleeping soundly in Claire's arms. "Since I was little," Claire replied. "I'm an only child, but my house was next to an orphanage. I'd spend hours there playing with the kids. They made me feel less alone." Ethan said nothing for a moment, but his gaze softened. He understood, and he realized every time he spoke with Claire, he wanted the conversation to last just a little longer. Claire, too, sensed the change. Ethan's eyes no longer held distance. There was something deeper in the way he looked at her now. Empathy, genuine care. Not the eyes of an employer toward his staff, but the eyes of a man learning how to feel again. One Saturday evening, Ethan knocked on Claire's door just as she had finished putting Chris to bed. "Are you free tonight?" he asked, slightly hesitant. I'd like to invite you to dinner, with the family, not as staff, as a guest." Claire froze. She had never sat at the Whitmore dining table. Her heart pounded. "I'm not sure if I should." She hesitated. "You should," Ethan smiled, "because I'd like you there, and I think Chris would too." That night, Claire wore a modest sea-green dress, her hair tied low, and a soft touch of powder on her face. Pure, unembellished beauty. Sophia nodded in greeting when Claire entered the dining room, not as cold as before. The dinner unfolded gently. Ethan sat across from Claire, his gaze often lingering. Claire whispered softly to Chris, seated in his high chair beside her, occasionally smiling when she caught Ethan watching her. She felt accepted, not like a maid misplaced in a world she didn't belong to, but a part, however small, of something warm and real. From that night on, a quiet current of affection grew between Claire and Ethan, steady and unspoken. No one rushed, no one declared it. But each accidental touch, each glance across the hallway, each burst of Chris's laughter when they were together, was silently shaping something beautiful. Claire knew she wasn't in the same place she had been before, but more importantly, in Ethan's eyes, she was no longer invisible. The closeness between Claire and Ethan was no longer something that could be hidden. The way they looked at each other in silence, their strolls with Chris in the garden, and Ethan's soft smile every time Claire entered a room, all of it became whispered gossip throughout the estate. The staff murmured behind her back. Rumors floated in every hallway. Some were mocking, others disapproving, and a few simply sighed. Because everyone knew, in the Whitmore family, love never crossed class lines. Then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, a black Rolls-Royce pulled up to the estate. A woman in her 70s stepped out, silver hair neatly pinned, a charcoal wool coat over her shoulders, and eyes sharp as glass. Margaret Whitmore, the most powerful and feared woman in the family. Her arrival was unannounced. But everyone understood. She came because of the rumors. That evening's dinner felt like breathing underwater. Ethan sat at the head of the table, Claire was invited to sit next to Chris, and Margaret sat directly across from her, scrutinizing her every move. "Claire, I'm told you started here as a housekeeper." Margaret spoke, her voice measured but cold. "Yes, ma'am," Claire replied softly. "And now the official nanny. Quite the advancement." Claire nodded, steady. "I'm grateful for the opportunity." "Gratitude is good, but so is knowing your place. What kind of family do you believe you belong in, Claire?" Claire froze momentarily, but kept her calm. "I believe what matters is not where I come from, but how I treat those around me." The room fell silent. Ethan turned to look at her, surprised and proud. After dinner, Margaret invited Claire to her private library, a dark wood-paneled room with high ceilings and the scent of old paper. Claire sat across from the woman who commanded an entire legacy, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. "I'll be direct," Margaret began. "I've seen the way my grandson looks at you." Claire said nothing, her hands clenched gently in her lap. "Ethan is a good man, but easily swayed by emotion. This family has standards, and a relationship like this would damage its image." Claire looked up, steady. "I never intended to cause problems." "I know," Margaret nodded, "which is why I'm offering you a chance to walk away with dignity." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "This is a personal letter of recommendation from me to a prestigious preschool academy in New York. Should you accept, you'll have a position as an advisor, housing provided, and a scholarship to further your education. A noble beginning, but elsewhere." Claire stared at the envelope in silence. "In return," Margaret continued slowly, "you'll leave this place. No goodbye, no conversation with Ethan." Claire sat still, every word cut deeper. A part of her wanted to cry, but she didn't. "Thank you," she whispered, "for thinking of my future. But I need time to consider." "Of course," Margaret said, standing. "Just remember, sometimes letting go is the most graceful act of all." The door to the library closed quietly behind her. Claire remained seated, the envelope in her hands, torn between a chance to rise and a love not yet spoken, but already planted deep in her heart. Claire returned to her room that night, still holding the envelope Margaret had handed her. The small space felt unusually quiet. Outside, the wind rustled softly through the window, while inside, her mind was split in two. One side whispered, "This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You may never get it again." The other side ached, "But your heart, it doesn't belong in New York." Claire set the envelope down on the desk, opened it, and read the recommendation letter line by line. The elegant words, the promises of prestige, and a future carved in gold. But the more she read, the more distant she felt from herself. She thought of Chris, the weight of him sleeping in her arms. She thought of Ethan, his gentle gaze, the quiet evenings spent together, words not needed. That night, Claire didn't sleep. She sat by the window for hours, watching the city lights flicker far away, holding on tightly to one truth in her heart. Dignity is never something to be traded, even for a whole new life. The next morning, Claire gently knocked on the door of the library, where Margaret Whitmore was already seated, reading her morning paper. Golden light streamed through the window, casting a soft glow across the room. "Come in," Margaret's voice called calmly. Claire entered, holding the envelope from the day before. Her face showed no fear, no hesitation, only quiet determination and clarity. "Thank you," Claire began, "for the incredible opportunity you offered me. Truly, it's an honor." Margaret looked up, eyes sharp. "So, you've made your decision?" Claire nodded. "I can't accept the offer." The room seemed to pause. "I believe you truly meant well. But if I were to leave, not by choice, but because I was forced to pick between my dream and the person I love, then even if I succeeded, I wouldn't be myself anymore." "The person you love?" Margaret repeated, her gaze narrowing. Claire didn't flinch. "Yes, I love Ethan, but that love doesn't blind me. If he doesn't feel the same, I'll still stay, because I care deeply for Chris, and because I want to do this job with my own merit, not through pity or privilege." Margaret was silent. She studied the young woman in front of her, not begging, not flattering, not weak. There was a quiet strength in Claire, one that didn't need to shout to be heard. "You know," she said softly, "very few people in my life have ever dared to say no to me." Claire smiled gently. "I believe sometimes a no says more about who we are than any yes ever could." Another pause. Then something unexpected. Margaret nodded. "Very well," she said slowly. "You have dignity. This family could use more people like you." Claire bowed her head, heart still trembling but filled with pride. Whatever came next, she knew one thing for sure. Today, she had chosen herself. Claire was still seated in the library, her hands gently resting on the envelope in her lap, when the door opened. She turned, startled. Ethan stood there. His face wasn't angry or surprised. Just one thing was clear. He had heard everything. "How long have you been standing there?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Long enough to know you didn't trade your pride." Ethan stepped forward, his gaze steady. Claire looked down. "I didn't want to make things more complicated." "You didn't," he interrupted. "You made this whole family rethink how we measure someone's worth." At that moment, Margaret entered, her hands clasped neatly in front of her. "I'm not used to being refused," she said calmly, her eyes on Claire. "But if my grandson has chosen a woman like you, then perhaps I was wrong to underestimate your courage and your dignity." Claire stood, ready to respond, but Margaret raised a hand gently. "No need for more words. Just take good care of Ethan and Chris." Then she turned to her grandson. "If you've got something to say, don't wait. Smart women don't stand around forever." Ethan turned back to Claire, his hands slightly shaking as he pulled a small blue box from his pocket. He opened it, a simple, elegant ring that reflected his character. "Claire Bennett," he said, kneeling. "You held my nephew when no one else did. You held this family together when I couldn't. And now, I want to hold you, not just as Chris's nanny, but as the woman I want to grow old with. Not for tradition, not for redemption, just because life without you feels unbearable." Claire's breath caught. "Ethan," she whispered, "I only have one condition." "Anything," he smiled. "I want to keep working and studying. I don't want this love to cost me my dream." He held her hand tighter, eyes unwavering. "Then we'll chase that dream together. You won't have to give anything up." Claire nodded, tears finally falling, not from pain, but from joy. And in that moment, with Ethan's hand in hers and Chris asleep nearby, Claire realized this was not the end of her story. It was the beginning of everything she thought she'd lost. Margaret stepped forward, gently adjusting the hem of Claire's dress. "My dear," she said softly, "don't ever let anyone make you feel unworthy of love." For the first time, Claire laughed through her tears. She wasn't just loved, she was chosen, respected, and allowed to remain fully herself. As Ethan slid the ring onto her finger, Claire felt her heart stop for just a second, then burst into 1,000 beats of joy. She had never dared to dream of this, never imagined the man she quietly loved would kneel before her, offering not just affection, but respect. That night, she stood alone on the porch, the cool night breeze brushing against her cheeks. What filled her mind wasn't a grand wedding or a luxurious gown. It was the image of quiet evenings, reading with Chris, early mornings walking him to school, and those education classes she never thought she'd be able to attend. Her dream was no longer distant. It was forming bit by bit, shaped by her choices, and by a love that didn't require her to sacrifice who she was. Claire knew life wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, judgment, and whispers that lingered in corners. But now she wasn't alone. She had Ethan, she had Chris, and she had herself, whole, unbroken, stronger than ever before. 3 years later, on a crisp spring morning in the peaceful town of Napa Valley, the white wooden gate of a small preschool swung open. A sign at the front read, "Little Roots, a preschool founded by Claire Bennett." The journey had been long, but every step had led her here. Claire stepped out, adjusting the lavender pots on the front porch. She wore a simple cotton dress, her hair tied neatly back, and her face radiant with a smile that wasn't meant for anyone else. It was for herself, because finally she was living a life she had chosen. This little school was a dream born in childhood, a place where not just children, but lost adults could find light again. Ethan appeared moments later, carrying Chris, now a 5-year-old with wild imagination and endless energy. In his hand, a colorful drawing he proudly showed his mother. "I drew you, Daddy, and the baby," Chris said, pointing to a little circle on Claire's belly. Claire laughed, bending down to kiss his forehead. "Not even born yet and already famous," she teased. Ethan placed a hand gently on her shoulder. The way they looked at each other wasn't hesitant anymore. It was the gaze of equals, partners who had weathered storms and were now building something lasting. Life in Napa Valley moved slowly, but meaningfully. Each morning, Claire welcomed children from across the region, some shy, some bold, but all met with the same gentle love. She taught them how to watch the trees, how to listen to their friends, and how to recognize kindness, lessons that didn't appear in textbooks, but mattered most. In the afternoons after school, Claire returned home to Ethan and Chris. They cooked together, watered plants, read stories. Life was quiet but beautiful, like a soft melody. One weekend afternoon, Claire sat on the wooden bench beneath the cherry tree behind the house. A breeze played through her hair as her hand rested on her growing belly. Chris came running, arms outstretched, and threw himself into her lap. His little voice, muffled against her belly, said softly, "I love you, Mommy." Claire froze. The word hit her like sunlight after a storm, unexpected, warm, and blindingly real. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. It was the first time he called her Mommy. She held him tightly, tears falling, not out of surprise, but because her heart had never felt this full. In a world once wrapped in judgment and barriers, Claire didn't just survive. She rebuilt her life with kindness, courage, and love. She was no longer the invisible housemaid, no longer the girl doubted and dismissed. She was a wife, a mother, a founder, someone chosen, and most of all, herself. And this time, no one could take that from her.